The broadcast was supposed to be routine. The cameras were rolling, the audience was buzzing, and millions of Americans had tuned in to watch what they thought would be just another fiery exchange between Donald Trump and his critics. But within seconds, something happened that froze the entire room in disbelief. Trump began speaking with his usual bluster, loud, animated, and determined to dominate the stage. He waved his hands, pointed at the audience, and repeated the same lines that his supporters had heard 1,000 times before. Yet suddenly, mid-sentence, his words began to unravel. His voice cracked, his thought trailed off, and then silence. The silence was deafening. For a split second, the cameras caught his face, frozen in confusion. His eyes darted back and forth as though searching for the line he had lost. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some supporters tried to cheer to cover the awkward pause, but the unease was undeniable. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And then, the cutaway shot that changed everything. Barack Obama, sitting in the front row, watching carefully. His face wasn't mocking, nor smug. It was steady, composed, and unmistakably concerned. The contrast was cinematic. One man unraveling before the world, the other embodying calm and quiet strength. And in that instant, millions of Americans knew something was terribly wrong. The media scrambled. Producers shouted in earpieces. Anchors whispered urgently. Camera crews zoomed in tighter. On Twitter, hashtags began to pop before the clip had even finished airing. The audience inside the room shifted uncomfortably, some leaning in, others turning to each other, whispering. It wasn't just a stumble. It wasn't just another gaffe. The man who had branded himself as unbreakable was breaking, live, in real time, for the world to see. And yet, as the tension thickened, the sense of foreboding grew heavier. Because deep down, the crowd wasn't just watching a moment of weakness. They were watching the beginning of something that would spiral far beyond that stage. But no one could have predicted the explosive confrontation that was about to unfold. The stage was set like a gladiator's arena. Bright lights bore down on the podiums, casting long shadows across the floor. Behind them, an audience of hundreds sat shoulder to shoulder, restless and eager. Millions more were tuned in across the country, waiting for fireworks. This wasn't just another town hall. It had been billed as the political face-off of the season. Donald Trump had come into the event determined to reassert his dominance. For weeks, critics had whispered about his faltering speeches, his late-night rants, and his increasingly erratic behavior. But tonight, he believed, would silence all doubts. He was going to show strength, energy, control. His plan was simple. Bulldoze his opponent with volume and bravado, overwhelm the stage until the story was once again about his power, not his weakness. But across from him sat Barack Obama, not as a candidate, not as a man looking for the spotlight, but as the nation's elder statesman. Calm, measured, dignified. He didn't need to prove himself. His legacy was already carved into the fabric of history. And that's precisely what made his presence so intimidating. Obama wasn't there to play Trump's game. He was there to observe, to speak when necessary, and to remind America what leadership once looked like. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just about two men clashing on stage. It was about the image of America projected to the world. It was about whether the nation could still trust its leaders to be truthful, transparent, and healthy enough to bear the weight of the presidency. Every stumble mattered. Every pause echoed louder than words. Trump knew the eyes of the nation were on him. His supporters cheered wildly at his entrance, chanting his name, willing him to look strong. But under the lights, the pressure grew heavier. Sweat glistened on his forehead. His hands gripped the podium tighter. He looked across the stage and saw Obama's steady gaze, not hostile, not mocking, but piercingly calm. It was the gaze of a man who had nothing left to prove, staring at someone who had everything to lose. The moderators pressed forward with questions about leadership, health, and responsibility. Each word felt like it carried extra weight, an unspoken challenge hanging in the air. The country had seen politicians spar before, but this was different. The tension wasn't just partisan, it was existential. What happens when the man who insists he's strong begins to falter? What happens when his decline can no longer be brushed off as a slip of the tongue or a momentary lapse? The world was about to find out. Because on that stage, the drama wasn't merely political theater. It was a test of truth versus denial, composure versus chaos. The buzzing crowd knew it. The anchors whispering in studio headsets knew it. And Obama, with his calm silence, seemed to know it better than anyone. The confrontation wasn't just about scoring points. It was about trust. Could America trust what it was seeing with its own eyes? Could it trust a leader who denied what was plain to millions of viewers? Or would the truth, undeniable, raw, and unavoidable, finally shatter the illusion? One stumble had already shaken the room. But the night was only beginning. What happened next wasn't just about politics. It was about the truth finally breaking free. To understand the weight of that faltering moment on stage, you have to step back and remember who Donald Trump has always claimed to be. For decades, his brand was built on bravado. He was the man who never admitted weakness, never apologized, never conceded an inch. From the golden towers of New York to the charged rallies of Middle America, his persona was carefully crafted, larger than life, untouchable, unstoppable. When he entered politics, that bravado only intensified. He mocked his rivals with nicknames, taunted reporters, and laughed at the missteps of others. If an opponent stumbled over a word or lost their train of thought, Trump seized it like a weapon, replaying it for crowds until the laughter drowned out everything else. His strength, he insisted, was not just policy, it was dominance. He was the man who never faltered. And for a time, it worked. Every slip of the tongue, every late-night rant on social media, every off-script ramble was brushed off by his base as just Trump being Trump. What would sink another politician only seemed to make him more unshakable in the eyes of his supporters. They reveled in his chaos, treating it as authenticity, as if unpredictability itself was a sign of power. But the cracks were always there, hidden beneath the bluster. The verbal stumbles became more frequent. The rants stretched longer into the night, less coherent, more erratic. There were moments where his words looped back on themselves, where sentences started one way and ended in another dimension entirely. Critics pointed to these as signs of decline, but his defenders shrugged them off. He's sharp as ever, they said. He's playing the media. Yet the contrast was becoming harder to ignore. The arrogance that once looked like confidence now veered into something different, fragile, brittle. Behind the jokes, behind the insults, there was a man desperately clinging to the image of strength even as the reality threatened to unravel. And this was the cruel irony. The man who had spent years ridiculing the frailty of others now found himself under the same merciless spotlight. He had mocked opponents for coughing during speeches, for misspeaking under pressure, for forgetting a name on stage. He had laughed at their humanity. But now his own humanity, the slips, the pauses, the vacant stares, was exposed for millions to see. This wasn't the first time it happened, of course. Those who paid attention remembered. The infamous press conference where he repeated the same phrase 3 times, unable to find his next point. The rally where he wandered mid-thought into an unrelated story, then circled back without finishing either. The times he held up a glass of water with 2 hands, visibly straining, or shuffled unsteadily down a ramp while insisting afterward that it was the steepest ramp in history. Each moment was a glimpse, a small tear in the armor of invincibility. But those moments had always been covered, explained away, hidden beneath noise. His team blamed lighting, exhaustion, bad microphones, even tricky ramps. His supporters turned every stumble into a meme of defiance, cheering louder to drown out doubt. For years, the illusion held. Until now. On this stage, under the piercing glare of the cameras, there was no excuse. There was no microphone to blame, no ramp to point to. It was just Trump, the words failing him, the silence hanging heavier than anything he had ever said. And across from him, Barack Obama, silent, steady, unblinking. The arrogance of yesterday clashed with the frailty of today, and the contrast was devastating. The man who had laughed at weakness was now the embodiment of it. The man who once mocked the struggles of others was now struggling before the world. And the audience felt it. The irritation, the unease, the sense of poetic justice. He laughed at others' struggles. The narrator's voice seemed to whisper. But now the spotlight was turning back on him. What had once been dismissed as quirks or personality suddenly looked like evidence. The late-night rants weren't just entertaining. They looked desperate. The verbal stumbles weren't harmless. They looked haunting. The bravado wasn't strength anymore. It was a mask, and the mask was slipping. And as millions watched, the question grew louder. How much longer could the illusion last? Because if there's one thing more dangerous than a man who refuses to admit weakness, it's the moment when his weakness can no longer be denied. While Trump's story was one of bravado and bluster, Barack Obama's journey had always been different. Where Trump had thrived on spectacle, Obama's strength came from silence, composure, and the ability to endure. To understand the gravity of his presence on that stage, you had to understand the history etched into his calm gaze. Barack Obama had never been handed power. He was the son of a Kenyan father and an American mother, raised by his grandparents in modest circumstances. His early life was defined not by wealth or privilege, but by questions of identity, belonging, and struggle. He grew up knowing what it meant to feel like an outsider, to navigate worlds where he was both seen and unseen. And instead of breaking him, those experiences forged resilience. Every challenge became a lesson in patience. Every doubt became fuel for persistence. Obama's rise was not sudden. It was painstaking. Law school at Harvard, where he became the first black president of the Harvard Law Review. Years as a community organizer, walking the streets of Chicago, listening to families who had nothing but still carried hope. He didn't come to politics with a golden name or inherited empire. He built his reputation step by step, conversation by conversation, grounded not in arrogance, but in service. When he entered national politics, the pressure was immense. He wasn't just another senator. He was a symbol. To millions, his very presence represented possibility, a bridge between past struggles and future hope. With that symbolism came scrutiny unlike any other. Every word was dissected, every gesture magnified. And yet, even under the harshest lights, he rarely lost his composure. His presidency was no different. Crises tested him from the very beginning. The financial collapse, endless partisan attacks, racial hostility that sought to delegitimize him at every turn. Even the most personal insults, accusations about his birthplace, about his faith, were hurled at him with venom. Where another might have lashed out, Obama responded with a steady tone, a deliberate cadence. Critics called him too calm, as if composure was weakness. But in truth, that calm was his greatest weapon. Because dignity under pressure is not the absence of emotion, it's the mastery of it. Time and again, Obama proved that mastery. In debates, when opponents tried to provoke him, he smiled, paused, and responded with precision. In moments of national tragedy, when the country needed healing words, he delivered them with empathy that felt both presidential and deeply personal. He knew the weight of leadership and the cost of arrogance. That was the difference. Trump's arrogance demanded attention, demanded applause, demanded to be fed constantly. Obama's humility allowed him to step back, to let silence speak louder than noise, to let truth stand taller than ego. His leadership wasn't about overpowering the room, it was about centering it. And it came at a cost. Behind the calm exterior were battles invisible to the public eye. Sleepless nights, impossible decisions, the burden of carrying not just policy, but the expectations of history itself. He wasn't flawless. He made mistakes, faced criticism, stumbled in his own ways. But what set him apart was how he responded. Not with excuses, not with denial, but with reflection. He owned the weight of his choices. That's why his presence on this particular night mattered so much. This wasn't just Barack Obama, the former president. This was a man whose entire life had been a lesson in how to endure arrogance without being consumed by it, how to face hostility without surrendering dignity. His silence on that stage wasn't empty. It was loaded with decades of composure, resilience, and quiet strength. The contrast could not have been sharper. Trump, sweating and stumbling, desperate to project control. Obama, steady and still, radiating a calm that only comes from knowing who you are. One man clinging to the illusion of power, the other embodying it without needing to prove a thing. And for the millions watching at home, the contrast wasn't just political, it was personal. They remembered Obama comforting grieving parents after a school shooting. They remembered him leading the nation through a recession with a steady hand. They remembered his speeches not for their volume, but for their cadence, for the way they made people believe, even briefly, that unity was still possible. He wasn't perfect, but he was prepared for this exact moment, when the truth would demand to be spoken. As the crowd shifted, as Trump's voice cracked and the silence deepened, Obama's eyes never wavered. He knew what the cameras were capturing. He knew what the world was seeing. And he knew that when the time came, when the noise became unbearable, it would not be arrogance that ended it. It would be dignity. Those qualities prepared him for the moment when the truth would demand to be spoken. The tension in the room was electric. After Trump's falter, the moderators pressed forward, their voices carrying a sharper edge now, as if they too sensed something unraveling beneath the surface. Trump leaned into the microphone, his voice louder, his tone more forceful, as though sheer volume could drown out the unease still lingering in the audience. His hands chopped the air, fingers jabbed toward Obama, his body swaying with erratic gestures. He declared himself the strongest, the sharpest, the most capable leader America had ever seen. He railed against the media, against the so-called witch hunts, against anyone who dared to question his stamina or his mind. But with each sentence, the performance felt more strained. The louder he spoke, the less convincing he sounded. What was once commanding now seemed desperate, as if he was shouting not to persuade the audience, but to convince himself. Obama sat quietly, his posture relaxed but attentive. He didn't interrupt, didn't roll his eyes, didn't mock. He simply watched, occasionally jotting a note, occasionally glancing at the moderator. His restraint only amplified the contrast. When the moderator finally turned to Obama, the shift was palpable. His voice was calm even. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He acknowledged Trump's words, but instead of meeting chaos with chaos, he responded with precision. He spoke of responsibility, of the importance of transparency in leadership. He reminded the audience that the presidency was not just about projecting strength, but about embodying it through service and honesty. The crowd murmured, a ripple of tension running through them. Some leaned forward, nodding at Obama's words. Others, loyal to Trump, crossed their arms, whispering furiously, willing their champion to strike back harder. The divide was visible, almost tangible. A room split down the middle between two Americas, each watching a different reality unfold. Trump, sensing that his grip on the narrative was slipping, grew even more animated. His words began to run together, sentences colliding midstream. He jabbed a finger toward Obama, accusing him of weakness, of dishonesty, of being the reason America had lost its footing. The accusations poured out faster, less coherent, like a flood breaking past the dam of control. Obama let him finish. Then, in a pause that stretched just long enough to command silence, he delivered his reply. It wasn't long. It wasn't complicated. It was sharp, measured, undeniable. He pointed out the inconsistencies in Trump's rant, the contradictions that had slipped through the bluster. He did it without raising his voice, without theatrics, just clarity cutting through the noise. The audience gasped. Not because the words were shocking, but because the contrast was. One man was spiraling louder and louder, while the other stood unshaken, his voice steady as stone. The more Trump tried to dominate, the more he revealed the cracks beneath his performance. The more Obama calmly spoke, the more the weight of truth pressed down on the room. It was no longer just a debate. It was a dissection. The unraveling of a man who had built his entire persona on invincibility, exposed under the brightest lights against the steadiest opponent. The murmurs in the audience grew louder now. Some laughed nervously. Others shook their heads. Reporters scribbled furiously. already framing the story in their minds. The moderators exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing something far more consequential than a normal political sparring match. The nation was watching not just a clash of words, but a clash of realities, arrogance colliding with composure, denial meeting truth head-on. And then, just as the tension seemed unbearable, Trump faltered again. His words tangled, his sentence cut short, his face briefly blank. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Obama didn't move. He didn't need to. But then came the moment that no spin doctor, no campaign strategist, could cover up. The tension that had been building for hours, the tremor under Trump's bravado, the quiet weight of Obama's composure, reached a breaking point. Trump's voice, once commanding, now wavered. He began speaking, his hands slicing through the air, but the words didn't land. Mid-sentence, he repeated himself. A phrase that had started with aggression ended with confusion. He tried to recover, jabbing the air as though gestures could patch the unraveling. But the pattern was undeniable. Cameras zoomed in on his face. His eyes darted from the moderator to Obama, back to the audience, searching for support that wasn't there. The stammering, the repeated phrases, the fragmented sentences, none of it could be spun. The audience shifted uneasily in their seats, sensing the fragility behind the showmanship. The air was thick with disbelief, with anticipation, with a quiet acknowledgement that something monumental was about to occur. Obama remained seated for a heartbeat longer than necessary, the calm in his eyes cutting through the noise. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. Then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward, his gaze fixed firmly on the man across from him. "Let's pause for a moment," he said, his voice measured, steady, carrying authority without volume. The room held its breath. Even the moderators seemed to lean in. Obama's words were calm, but the implication was seismic. He didn't mock Trump, didn't belittle him. He simply pointed out what was visible to everyone. The inconsistencies, the repetition, the signs of faltering strength. He traced a pattern, line by line, gesture by gesture, phrase by phrase, demonstrating with quiet clarity the cracks in the performance that had been masked by bluster and theatrics for far too long. Trump's hands fell to the podium. His eyes narrowed, scanning the room, scanning Obama, scanning the camera. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words tangled again, circling back on themselves. The confidence he had spent decades cultivating was slipping through his fingers in real time. And then, an unexpected voice broke the tension. From the panel seated nearby, a medical specialist, invited ostensibly to provide expert commentary on public policy, shifted uncomfortably. His face was pale, eyes darting from Trump to the moderator, then to Obama. He cleared his throat, hesitated, and finally spoke. "Sir, I think it's important to address what we're seeing here," he said, his voice trembling slightly under the glare of the cameras. "The repetition, the pauses, the confusion. These are signs of a serious medical concern. It's concerning." The room fell silent. A gasp rippled through the audience. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Even Trump's most loyal supporters shifted in their seats, suddenly uncertain, suddenly aware that the performance was no longer under his control. The spotlight that had been his ally was now a witness, unflinching, exposing what he could no longer hide. Obama stood, moving slowly but deliberately, each step measured, his presence commanding attention without a single word of anger. He looked out across the sea of faces, across the millions watching at home. And then, with a calmness that made the moment electric, he delivered the line that would define the evening. "This isn't about politics. This is about health, and the American people deserve honesty." The words landed like a thunderclap. The audience gasped collectively, some clutching their seats. The cameras panned, catching the ripple of shock across faces. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters scribbled furiously. Social media was already igniting. Hashtags forming even before the sentence had finished reverberating through the room. Trump's face changed, his usual bravado replaced with visible uncertainty. He opened his mouth again, but the words stumbled out, fragmented, uneven. The repetition continued, The gestures grew frantic, the attempt to regain control failing in real time. Every attempt to reclaim authority only underscored the collapse. The man who had spent decades projecting invincibility now appeared vulnerable, faltering under scrutiny that could no longer be dismissed. Obama, by contrast, remained poised. Every movement, every gesture, every word radiated control. His calm was not passive, it was active, deliberate. It was a mirror held up to chaos, a study in composure that highlighted the stark contrast between arrogance and dignity. Where Trump flailed, Obama was anchored. Where Trump spiraled, Obama elevated the moment into clarity. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into audible acknowledgement. Social media lit up in real time. Clips of the exchange went viral before the broadcast had even ended. Commentators scrambled to analyze the scene. Politicians whispered in astonishment backstage. Late-night hosts framed the clip as an unprecedented moment. Even casual viewers, scrolling past their feeds, paused, unable to look away from the unfolding spectacle. It wasn't merely a debate anymore. It was a revelation. The narrative that had been carefully managed, that had been spun, that had been protected by team strategists and loyalists, collapsed in front of an audience that could no longer unsee the truth. Every word, every gesture, every falter told a story that spin and rhetoric could not erase. And as the cameras cut between the two men, the imagery was undeniable. The villain, rattled and unraveling, exposed before the world. The hero, calm and unwavering, standing not just in opposition, but above, a symbol of steadiness and truth. It was cinematic. It was raw. It was irreversible. Even after the words were spoken, the room remained electric, the echoes of the mic drop line lingering. The moment was immortalized, not as a soundbite, not as a talking point, but as a turning point. A collapse framed against composure. A public reckoning. For millions of viewers, the question was no longer who would win the debate. It was who could embody leadership when the facade of strength had failed. The moment had passed, but its impact was only beginning. Within minutes, clips from the live event began circulating across every corner of the internet. Smartphones captured the hesitation, the faltering words, the repeated phrases, and Obama's measured response. The footage spread like wildfire. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag truth exposed. Hashtag Obama versus Trump. Hashtag mic drop moment. And before the broadcast had even ended, the nation was in a frenzy. On Twitter, feeds were flooded with reactions. Some cheered Obama's clarity and composure, praising him for his courage and integrity. Others defended Trump, attempting to spin the stumble as nothing more than nerves or a minor misstep. But the visuals were stark and undeniable. The repeated stumbles, the visible confusion, the stark contrast between the two men spoke louder than any argument could. Millions of viewers were witnessing a narrative that words alone could not mask, a collapse of projected power, met with unshakable dignity. Memes appeared almost immediately. Animated GIFs of Trump pausing mid-sentence, captions mocking the repetition, humorous edits juxtaposed with Obama's calm demeanor, all circulated across Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Late-night hosts seized the moment, crafting monologues that blended humor with astonishment. Political commentators dissected every gesture, every inflection, every pause, replaying footage frame by frame for audiences who couldn't get enough. Even mainstream news outlets scrambled to cover the event with a sense of urgency. Analysts debated whether this would have long-term implications for Trump's credibility. Headlines appeared in record time. Liv falter exposes leadership fragility. Obama's calm reveals the unspoken truth. A nation watches as facade crumbles. The narrative was no longer just about politics. It was about perception, trust, and undeniable evidence of faltering leadership. Supporters and critics clashed online in a digital battlefield. Comment threads became arenas of fierce debate. Some defended Trump fiercely, asserting he had simply misspoken, that the moment was overblown. Others pointed to the video as proof that arrogance could no longer hide vulnerability. Influencers, journalists, and even celebrities weighed in. Their posts amplified millions of times, shaping the national conversation. The spectacle transcended politics. It became a cultural touchstone, a moment referenced in late-night skits, talk shows, and viral compilations. Yet, amid the chaos, one thing was clear. The ripple effect could not be contained. Clips were shared across continents, translated into multiple languages, dissected on morning shows in Europe and Asia. The event became a case study in public perception, a lesson in how composure and truth can dominate even the loudest bluster. Social media algorithms amplified the contrast, rewarding clarity over chaos, poise over panic. Narratively, the event became a turning point. The falter was no longer a momentary lapse. It was a symbol, an image burned into public consciousness. Every repeated phrase, every hesitant gesture, every small stumble told a story that words alone could not alter. Obama's calm, deliberate response became a reference point, a reminder that leadership is measured not in noise, but in steadiness. The nation, riveted by the unfolding spectacle, began to see patterns beyond the single-stage moment. Conversations shifted from policy debates to character, from rhetoric to reliability. The imagery of a faltering Trump contrasted with Obama's dignity, created a new lens through which the public viewed leadership. For some, it was confirmation of what they had long suspected. For others, a startling revelation that challenged their assumptions. From living rooms to offices, from cafes to classrooms, people replayed the moment, discussing it in hushed tones or animated voices. It became the topic at every water cooler, every group chat, every online forum. Political scientists, comedians, and commentators alike agreed. The ripple effect couldn't be stopped. It was everywhere. By the end of the night, the event had transcended its original context. It was no longer just a debate, a town hall, or a televised argument. It had become a watershed moment, a cinematic revelation captured in real time, and a stark reminder of how power, arrogance, and composure play out on the world stage. The aftershocks would continue for days, weeks, and perhaps even years, shaping narratives, influencing opinions, and defining perceptions of leadership in ways few could have predicted. The drama of the stage faded, but the lessons of that moment were far from over. As cameras continued to flash and social media erupted, Barack Obama's presence on the stage crystallized into something larger than politics, a lesson in leadership, integrity, and truth. This wasn't simply about one man faltering under pressure. It was about the enduring values that define those who truly lead. Obama stepped back from the confrontation, allowing the silence to carry the weight of the truth. His composure was not merely a tactical choice. It was a statement about what leadership requires. Honesty cannot be optional. Service cannot be performative. Courage is not measured by volume, but by the willingness to face reality with clarity, even when it's uncomfortable. In the eyes of millions watching, he embodied the principle that dignity is stronger than denial, that integrity outweighs ego. It was a lesson repeated throughout history, yet made immediate and tangible in that single televised moment. The contrast was undeniable. One man clinging desperately to image, repetition, and bravado. The other standing firmly in the light of truth, calm yet uncompromising. The message was clear. Authority rooted in honesty carries far more weight than power claimed through intimidation or denial. The audience, both live and virtual, absorbed the impact. The applause was not for spectacle, nor for theatrics, nor for soundbites. It was for clarity, for morality in action. People reflected not only on the public figure of Obama, but on what it meant for themselves. That truth, courage, and dignity were not abstract ideals. They were forces that shaped reality and could inspire action. Every clip shared, every headline written, every social media post echoed the same theme. Service matters more than showmanship. Honesty matters more than noise. The event became a reminder that leadership is measured not in applause or followers, but in consistency, in accountability, and in the courage to confront difficult truths. Dignity over denial. Service over selfishness. Calm over chaos. These principles reverberated through conversations, classrooms, offices, and living rooms. Citizens debated, reflected, and reconsidered what they expected from those in power. It was more than politics. It was an affirmation of shared values, a reminder of the standards that define both leaders and the nation itself. And in that moment, the country collectively understood the power of integrity. The faltering, repeated phrases, the visible cracks in arrogance, they were no longer embarrassing footnotes. They were moral lessons etched in real time. The narrative of leadership had been reframed. It was no longer about who shouted the loudest or commanded attention, but about who acted with clarity, who spoke with truth, who carried responsibility with composure. In that moment, the nation was reminded that no lie can outlast the truth. The words resonated far beyond the broadcast. They became a mantra, a call to reflect not only on public figures, but on personal responsibility and moral courage. In every home where the debate was watched, in every discussion sparked by clips online, the lesson was the same. Integrity is the foundation of leadership. As Obama left the stage, he did so quietly, without flourish. Yet the echoes of his presence remained louder than any scream, louder than any bluster, louder than any attempt to distract from reality. The lesson was unmistakable. The strength of truth endures, the weight of dignity triumphs, and the call to service defines those who are truly worthy of leading. Barack Obama exposed the truth. A doctor confirmed it live. Millions watched as arrogance faltered, and dignity stood unwavering. This wasn't just a debate. It was a reminder that leadership rooted in honesty and service always outlasts noise and denial. When dignity speaks, arrogance always falls silent. Now it's your turn to keep the message alive. Share this story. Let others see the power of truth, and stand for clarity and integrity in every corner of your life. Subscribe, engage, and be part of a movement where dignity is louder than denial.